We think of skill as just like a means to an end, but actually it's not. Scientifically, we have shown it's tied to life motivation and purpose. We want to get good at something partially because we want to earn the trust and respect of people around us, particularly experts, people we look up to.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work, episode 305. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing. I get asked all the time how you can meet other listeners. To make that happen, we just launched a newsletter where we share weekly insights and tips that sometimes don't make it into the podcast, as well as opportunities to engage with the broader community. Go to the URL that I'm going to link to. It's our Beehive newsletter, and I'd love to have you register. It's free, and we promise we won't spam you. We'll never share your details without your permission. And of course, you'll get that link in the show notes. As always, if you like what we do, please tell a friend and give us a like and a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode, like this one from Caesar, who hails from our guest's hometown of Santa Barbara and says he's an engineer at a startup who listens while gardening, a fine activity. Caesar's favorite episode is the one which is also one of my favorite, Caesar, with Bruce Feiler, about finding meaningful work. Caesar, thank you for being a loyal listener. Bruce is a national treasure. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out that awesome episode. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly. And of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Today's fun fact: Lloyd Lee writes in Business Insider that robots may not be the answer to Chipotle's ongoing portion size scandal. For those unfamiliar with the drama, Chipotle customers have been correctly complaining about smaller portion sizes, as revealed by astute Wells Fargo analysts who meticulously ordered and evaluated 75 burrito bowls and found a 47% variance in weight. Lee says robots aren't necessarily the answer, although Chipotle is testing them. First, there's the open ethical question. Is Chipotle management knowingly instructing employees to skimp on expensive ingredients to boost margins? Chipotle vehemently denies the accusation. The other topic, of course, is if humans are to blame, how will robots impact the overall experience of customizing that Chipotle order? Chipotle is working with startup company Hyphen to streamline digital orders. Hyphen's robots can make 180 burrito bowls per hour, about 6 times more than a human can. The company is also evaluating Avocado. You heard that it is actually a bot called Avocado, a robot that, not surprisingly, cuts avocado prep time in half. Many customers say the in-store experience, what superfans call Chipotle hacks, will go away if robots make burritos. Perhaps we'll see robots fulfilling digital orders, but humans fulfilling orders placed in-store. We'll continue to follow this and related topics in upcoming episodes, and of course, we'll link to that full article in the show notes. Now, shifting to today's conversation, Matt Beane is a writer, professor, and foremost, someone who believes there's a right way to help humans coexist with machines at work. Matt's TED Talk from 2018 has been viewed more than 1.8 million times. In it, he challenges how we think about AI in the workplace because it violates how humans have learned skills for thousands of years. Matt helped found and fund Humatics, an MIT-connected IoT startup, and he's a frequent contributor to publications like Wired, MIT's Technology Review, TechCrunch, Forbes, and Robohub. Matt's new book, The Skill Code: How to Save Human Ability in an Age of Intelligent Machines, was recently published by HarperCollins, and it has received rave reviews from a murderer's row of legends like Adam Grant, my former professor Bob Sutton, Professor Ethan Mollick from Wharton, and Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn fame. Matt received his PhD and master's degrees from MIT's Sloan School of Management and his BA in philosophy from Bowdoin. Go Polar Bears. Without further ado, Matt, it really is my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about that illustrious background and how you got into the space.
Delighted to be here. I was really glad to get the invite. So glad to be chatting. And yeah, so it's funny. That story sounds really clean and pristine, doesn't it? And it's been a mess. My career is not a straight arrow. There are some folks, we all know them, who came right out of the gate, probably when they were 9, 12, knowing exactly where they were headed, and they headed there and it all worked out. That's not me. Uh, my first real paying job was as a dishwasher. I wrote about that in Wired, actually. Automation of dishwashing, I think, is a bit of a career problem in the restaurant industry. For example, this links straight to our conversation now. But no, but honestly, my first real grown-up job was as a high school math teacher. And I moved from that to trying to make it as a jazz guitarist. That didn't work out. After that, I became a consultant. I moved into industry doing adult learning, basically. So you can see the theme of this book is about skill and how we build it really honestly at work, and how that's under threat and what we can do about it, how we can build technology into part of the solution. Those things have been a lifelong obsession for me in one way or another. So I've blindly clawed my way through the thicket with those as guiding vectors. Then from consulting, I started to get very into the implications of technology for how the groups that I was consulting to were interacting with one another. I mean, I was around for the advent of things like the BlackBerry and the smartphone, and watching executive teams start to treat each other really differently because all of a sudden they had email in their pocket constantly and texting. That got me to apply to school, and that landed me at MIT amazingly. And I declared pretty quickly, yeah, I mean, in my application, but then, once I hit the ground there, that I wanted to study how robots and AI, but in particular robots in the beginning, were going to change the way that we learned and built skill at work. So what I'm doing now, I guess it's 12, 13 years later, that has actually been a straight arrow since about 2011, 2010. All the research I've done is focused on trying to answer and ask that question, not just because what we should expect is it makes it hard. New tech makes things hard in the beginning. That's a really old finding, actually. So I've always been trying to find the positive needle in the negative haystack of progress. Like where can we find early systematic success, and what can we learn from it so that we can bend the arc of history in the right direction faster? I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but certainly it's not been until maybe the last decade and a half. It hasn't been that clean.
Next episode, we'll talk about your non-career as a jazz guitarist. How about that?
Yeah, sure.
But for this one, we'll stick to the future work.
Deal.
In the TED Talk, you talk about see it, do it, learn it. And
right.
In the book, The Skill Code, you introduce the 3 C's of learning. You have this nice way of breaking these very complicated concepts into kind of digestible kind of mnemonics or frameworks. What are the 3 C's?
Challenge, complexity, and connection. I looked across my own research, across all available research over more than 13 disciplines around what do we know scientifically about how people build skill being a very distinct thing, which is, can you reliably do something under pressure? That's skill. That's different than knowledge. That's different than the kind of stuff you typically get in school, although that's changed in some ways. If we're talking about the difference between the book learning and enough knowledge to get started in a job, skill is the I can do it reliably under pressure. That comes from collateral contact with people who know more and can do more as you're trying to solve real world problems. And if boiled down, you can think of that as the skill code is the title of the book, and those 3 C's, that is the skill code. Challenge, summed up, is are you working close to the edge of your capability, and are you focused while you're doing so? There's more detail in the book, and I blow that out into a 10-point checklist for each of these, but that's basically it. If you're there, that's the healthy place to be learning. It is not a comfortable place. It is not a fun place. It is a focused place. Then complexity is perpendicular to that if you want to. Challenge is like I'm trying to focus on getting good at a thing, writing scripts or tying a surgeon's knot. Complexity is I'm engaging with the broader universe of skills and tasks that I'm embedded in so I can be more robust to surprise. I can understand the complexity of the work so that, if I'm in a warehouse, which I've studied recently, if all of a sudden the orders start to pile in, I'm ready as a manager because I know it's winter time and now big jackets are going to start to come in this warehouse. Like I'm ready for that shock. If I'm only focused on getting good at my specific task, I'm not. I haven't engaged with complexity. And the third is connection, which is a warm bond of trust and respect between human beings. We don't often think about that as necessary for strictly, for building skill, but the research is super clear on that your healthiest journey to the ability to reliably do something under pressure proceeds through warm bonds of trust and respect across expertise levels. Basically, will people give you access and a shot at trying that complex thing? They've got to trust and respect you to some degree. But the other part is motivation to even try. We think of skill as just like a means to an end, but actually it's not. Scientifically, we have shown it's tied to life motivation and purpose. We want to get good at something partially because we want to earn the trust and respect of people around us, particularly experts, people we look up to. And experts in turn want trust and respect from people that look up to them, right? That's just part of what humans value intrinsically. And so that motivation is what allows us to get up earlier in the morning, work harder, try to get good. So there's the 3 C's. That's the sort of one of the key contributions to this book is I took about a year and a half to really carefully go through all the research that we have available and see if there was a simple way, a mnemonic, as you say, to see it, represent it, share it so that people could look around their environment and sense, are these 3 things in healthy supply? If not, what can I do about it? That's the first third of the book.
So Matt, you're like a modern day like Studs Terkel. Like you're just fascinated by the relationship between humans and work. And having read the book, I know that you'll show up, like you said, in a warehouse or an operating room, and you become like, an ethnographer, or you pick apart the work that's going on. Talk us through your process. Like you show up at a warehouse and, what's your process for learning about how that work is performed?
The fun thing to say here, given your work and context in this audience, is that basically this is a business development task. Showing up at a warehouse, I don't ever get to do that, ever. Or at a site. In the operating room, you can't do that without having spent a mountain of persuasive, engaging work to build the case for why it would be useful to insult your operations with this stranger showing up and asking stupid questions and standing around in dangerous spots without knowing it. Access to that opportunity is part of what shapes the opportunity itself. So it's not like this sort of annoying thing you have to do before getting there. There's a very fine art to doing that is subtle, not well taught about. I was head of business development for a consulting firm before getting into this kind of work. So to me, it was fun and engaging to be like, okay, a stranger in the operating room, why would that be a good idea from your point of view? I had better come up with a damn good answer to that. And if I can, by the way, you're going to haul me in that operating room by the lapels and make me stand there to take notes, so that's the way I thought about that task. If you do that, showing up and taking notes, while really difficult. I mean, picture me in an operating room in scrubs with a, Lenovo laptop on a surgical instrument stand, typing, say 70, 80 words a minute, everything I could about a 5-hour procedure the whole time, and helping out, flip the lights on, all that kind of stuff. That's awesome. It's super intense. It's like Mike Rowe kind of dirty jobs, a Studs Terkel, whatever you want. And there's a whole skill and art to that, like gathering data, processing it, and then offline figuring out, what the hell did I just see? I've watched 97 procedures now. What am I noticing? What's going on? So that's a key part of the process. To me, the fun and engaging bit was I want to get into a place where lots of people have tried and failed. I want to get data in a situation where people normally would never let a stranger in there. No way. So anyway, there's a whole part of that I try to focus on, and that I think is part of what allows me to produce interesting findings. Because if you've got an interesting context that's plausibly connected to the future of work and you get really rich data, then it's harder to screw up on the analytical portion of it.
I've heard your TED talk and you described this scenario, and then I read a version of it in the book about in the operating room and how the novice surgeon learns more effectively, or they end up being a better surgeon with more interaction with the patient if the expert surgeon gives them more time to do the job, to learn the skill. I wanted to jump through the screen and ask you when I was watching this on YouTube, Hey, Matt, isn't it the case that if what we optimize for is the best outcome for the patient, and let's say hypothetically there's a robot that can perform surgery better than a human, maybe it's a called Da Vinci from Intuitive Surgical, or
Yep.
these have been commercialized, right? If the robot is more likely to deliver a better outcome for the patient, then should we rethink who's the novice, who's the expert, what's the learning process? If we, in the case of surgery, or I think this applies to warehouses and other
Yep.
domains, if the robots can do the job better, maybe we should rethink the nature of that job function.
Yes, absolutely agreed. Not a part of that I would disagree with. And the challenge there is that it takes dramatic, new, intentional effort and sacrifice of scarce resources. Whereas in the past, so sure, robot doesn't, by the way, there are many patients, shockingly, who were like, tell the surgeon, okay, so you're going to do robotic surgery. When does the robot take over? And we're not anywhere close to that. But the lay public out there assume that the robot's just going to do the job. Patently false. However, the practical situation is that apprentice is optional now, or the resident. And actually, this does apply in law, warehousing, investment banking. I mean, I've since progressed across lots of other professions. ChatGPT now is a classic example. I have numerous stories about software development, people saying the death of the junior developer is nigh because Copilot has basically eliminated the need for them. So what if that's true, to the extent it's true, and I think it's actually true quite extensively, i.e. for like billions of working adults now, then yeah, we can come up with an alternative way of handling the work that will allow newbies to learn while not compromising the efficiency gains that come from these new tools. But we got to be deliberate and focused about that. Whereas in the past, more so anyway, it's not an on-off thing. We could rely on this taken for granted, implicit, shoulder to shoulder sort of cooperation that was mandated by just the tools we were using. So the graphic example of this is in surgery. Before the robot, you needed another human being to finish the work and to do it. Whether or not you wanted a novice involved, they had to be involved for the entire 4.5 hour procedure, more or less. Were they involved in exactly the same way as you? Of course not. But they're swimming in the pool the whole time, so they're learning something. Now, if it's optional, somebody somewhere has to burn a bunch of calories to figure out a way, a new technology, new tools, new ways of organizing that will re-inject them into the work.
So 97 surgeries and who knows how many other warehouse visits and shadowing lawyers and that sort of thing that you've done. I got to believe that there are times when you really get deeply connected to a work function and say, that one's got to go away. I mean, for example, in a warehouse, the poor soul whose career is to screw the caps on the tubes of toothpaste, like you got to think maybe that person wasn't like put on this planet to do that, but maybe there's a higher paying, job calibrating the bot who puts the tube on the, or, evaluating the data, collecting the data, analyzing it, like things that maybe are better suited for humans. Give us some examples of when you've seen a job where you're like, rather than studying like how to make this novice an expert, maybe the right thing to do for this field is just to talk about new roles, and
Yes.
and it's okay that some will go away.
Yes, totally agree in general. Although I will say, actually, the modal shift out there by far is not eliminate a role. It's just you have a mix of 11 tasks you've got to do. And 3 or 4 of those, boy, oh boy, should you be handing off to some form of. So, but those other 7, still a good use of your effort and time, and you get to do more of them. And this is what we see with firms investing in automation, by the way. There are gains and losses in terms of roles and jobs. That's important to pay attention to. I don't these days, to be perfectly frank, because it's a rounding error compared to the problem of out of your 11 tasks, we're going to take 3 of those and automate them away. What does that mean for you? Reskilling or adjusting your workflow, new collaborative patterns inside the firm. So it's not the toothpaste tube job. I could give you examples of those, but I actually don't like to anchor folks on that. I think the 3 orders of magnitude bigger problem is okay, how about 80% of the entire world's workforce needs to reskill for 10 to 15% of their job right now? That's a very subtle problem. It's not a job loss or a gain, right? It's not a shift of a role, but it's the real one on the ground. And we stink at formal training. It doesn't really work. And we're counting on this informal way of learning your job. And that's also, we're busting that too. Anybody who wants to talk about job gains or losses, I'd just say, I think it's good for some people to be focused on that problem, but let's not focus there. We got to focus on reskilling. So for your person who, sure, they shouldn't be screwing on toothpaste tube caps, or let's just say dealing with certain kinds of programming tasks that are just obviously routinized now. Yeah, the challenge is, what is the fastest way to get that person to reliably performing this new, more enriched suite of tasks and dumping those three? So that's a combination of workflow redesign. So it's not to do with a person and their job. That's to do with, if we assume on this line of people producing code or writing legal documents that 10 to 15% of their job is going to get automated away, what's the new whole workflow look like for the firm? What's the healthy way for that to be stitched together? And what do each of these people need to know how to be able to do in order to do that new function better? That's not just you already knew how to do those 7 tasks. It's now you're using Gen AI to do it, or now you're dealing with a robot, or now you have a new UX to deal with. So there is some new skill. Do you just assume people will learn that by doing? Dangerous assumption these days.
We've had versions of this conversation in previous episodes, and one of the ones I've come back to, I love the conversation with Kamal Ahluwalia, who was at Eightfold at the time, about the need for reskilling. And this company has a great vision. It's that there's a right job for everyone on the planet. And it's a company, a commercial motivation, but they believe that with this technology platform, they can help everyone find the best job, which may be, adjacent to what they're doing now. But this whole notion that everybody should think about the fluid, career trajectory, and reskilling is not something to be looked down upon. It's a part of the natural evolution of work. I'm curious to know from you, with all the time you spend in the field, there's this just complicated relationship between humans and machines. Is that consistent? What are the attitudes that you're hearing in the field from employees and their employers about investments in reskilling?
They're not focused on it. Yeah, I'm talking mostly these days to leaders in firms and technologists, those two groups. Both, the leaders are more focused on the workforce readiness question and reskilling and so on. Up close and personal, the first concern, complaint, question, hope, whatever, has to do with exactly what you started with, which is my job going away? Or are we going to destroy jobs? Not upskilling or deskilling. Technologists are much less focused on this question, the people that build those kind of technologies, but they're very amenable to the question.
I was afraid you might say that it's seen as binary. My job's either here or it's not. And the kind of fluid nature of jobs changing through reskilling and upskilling, it seems like a nuance that's, at least from my vantage point, it's not being talked about enough.
Yeah, and that is the modal no, not even. I mean, that it's the vast majority of the reactions I get to this book. When I'm starting to have conversations like this one, conversations with execs and technologists, they're like, ooh, that's a good one. Haven't been thinking about that. Or that's a big deal. Oh, yeah, nobody's talking about that.
In reading the book, I had this, I don't know, call it a philosophical thought about your kind of thesis on the novice expert relationship. And I was thinking about whether or not that paradigm is relevant in this era of kind of humans collaborating with machines. And what I was thinking about is less, the junior surgeon, senior surgeon example, or I know there are lots of patterns that fit that.
Yep.
Like you say, over a pattern of thousands of years. But what about if it's maybe like the relationship that a human amputee has with their prosthetic leg, where it really is a human partnering with a machine, the prosthetic, where, just not to, bastardize this analogy, but the machine has some skills and knows some things that are different, just different, that the human needs, and the human has some things, motivations and rational thinking and empathy, things that the machine will never have. And so it's more about them like collaborating and learning together than
Yep.
where there's like an expert and a novice. What's your thought on that kind of changing paradigm of that relationship?
Yeah, so in a certain sense, I'll just say that has always been true about technology, any technology. So you can go back to the calculator. I was listening to everything you were saying. I'm thinking, does this apply to a handheld calculator? Yup. Does it apply to the lever that Archimedes talked about? Yeah, actually it does. So when played well, relationships between humans and technologies are strongly complementary. You don't rely on a tech to substitute for what a human can do. In the short run, that's immediately and always what people do. But then we figure out like it's much better to use tech to do things that humans could never do or wouldn't even consider trying. And humans can do more of what they're good at. That's generally the story of human progress to the extent that we've got it. It's trying for those complementarities sooner, better, faster. That's what we need to be doing and can do. It typically takes decades to get there. The first 10, 20. Yeah, first 10 to 20 years, the research backs you up on that. 10 to 20, sometimes 40 years of a new kind of technology. We just swap it in to try to replace work that humans understand, can have paradigms for. It's as much culturally bound as it is technically bound. There's a failure of imagination, you could say. But this is the story of technological diffusion writ broad, like since, fire. We eventually figure out radically cool, valuable new things to do where 1 + 1 is 7.
We're talking to a community of technologists, and for the most part, those who are on Team Human, AI enthusiasts, and wanting to believe in the power of the technology. My coaching has always been, going back to you're talking about Archimedes and the lever. I usually think about the first industrial revolution, the
Sure.
18th century, and what it meant then to be on the wrong side of innovation. If you were a Luddite or a machine breaker, it didn't work out too well for you. But if you invested in the collaboration with machines, that moving from a hand loom to a sewing machine, you very much were the ones that ended up getting paid more and accelerating in your career. When you think about talking to a community of technologists who now again are facing a complicated relationship with AI, talk about how you see the pattern maybe playing out perhaps differently this time around than with previous technology cycles.
Yeah, maybe I'll just cut way forward to the chase on this one and say there's a power move available for all technologists dealing with AI-enabled tech right now, which is to ask yourself the question, how would I build differently if I was trying to optimize for productivity and human ability jointly? So what features would be available if imagine a world where just using your tool produced better outcomes, more productivity, and at the end of every use session or a week of use, that human had more capability than they did, and then more valuable capability than they did at the beginning of that session or week. The firms that do that are going to be stepping into this giant vacuum right now that nobody quite senses, but it's starting to show up. Fine, my book's here, but I'm reading blog posts now from people inside big tech firms who are like, oh, junior developers are really struggling, or junior lawyers don't have a leg up, or whatever. If your tool if you can turn around to a client or a customer and say legitimately, look, in addition to the productivity that you get out of our tool, your users are going to be upskilled in their career and be more complementary to the machine just through the UX. That's going to sell. You're going to outcompete your competitors. You're going to look fantastic. Your brand's going to shine because people are worried about this. Quietly, they don't have names for it yet. They can hear the train rumbling down the tracks and can't look around the corner at it yet, but they feel something is wrong. We're trading away human capability needlessly. So that's the power move, I think. And I wrote a Substack post about this in October of last year called Don't Let AI Dumb You Down. And at the end, the back quarter of that piece, I wrote in detail about how you can change the custom settings in ChatGPT so that at the end of every use session, you will be nudged towards more skill. And that is a brain dead simple set of changes that OpenAI could have made to their UX a long time ago. They haven't done it. Who's going to do it first? They're going to crush. They're going to be able to say, you're going to be nudged towards being more robustly and valuably skilled just by interacting with our systems. You won't even notice it. Or, by the way, you will. It'll be mildly annoying, but you're going to pay a 3% productivity tax for a career boost. Anyway, I think that's just an unchecked box at the moment.
What's an example of where you'd want let's say ChatGPT to nudge you about investing in the skill as opposed to just some kind of, generative output?
Yeah, sure. So I basically boiled down the entire book into 2 custom settings, the contents of the custom settings box in ChatGPT. So if folks want all of my current detail, they can go to that post. But I'll give you an example. Challenge, complexity, and connection. We talked about those in the beginning of the book. I say in that box, I want more of these things in healthy supply. So here's what that looks like. Here's how you should treat me differently. Ask me before you go do something if I want to do any part of it for myself, and encourage me to do that. It is annoying as hell, right? Every single prompt turn I get with ChatGPT now, it's before I go do this, is any part of this? I think you could probably do this part. Do you want to do it? And most of the time I say, no, hell no, leave me alone. But 1 time in 10, maybe 2 times in 10, I'm like, yeah, actually, I'm going to go write that script, or I'm going to go do that research. Cool. And on human connection, by the way, here's another fun one. At the end of every prompt about a complex problem, it'll say, are there other human beings who have a shared interest in this problem that you could connect with instead of just me being this chatbot? That has prompted me to reach out to and connect to other human beings who happen to share an interest in timing the rocket landings at Vandenberg Air Force Base up near Santa Barbara, right? I wouldn't have done that. And now the tech is nudging me towards other people. Give me a break. It's a target-rich environment.
Those are great examples. I didn't get the point when you were first making it. Please share with me offline the link to that post from October, and I'll make sure we share it in the show notes. So we can't have this conversation without also delving into the ethics of technology and AI and how it's disrupting the workplace. And maybe I'll frame it this way. I often share on this podcast, as technologists, we're really good at answering the question, what can go right? It's what we do. It's what it means to be, to be a fan of technology. And we're really dangerously bad at asking what could go wrong. With AI, it's equally important that we ask and answer both questions. What are the limits? Or maybe just from your field research, where are there examples where you say, you know what, that's a bridge too far when it comes to maybe things that we're doing because the technology is capable of it, and we're not pausing and asking, is this the right way to use technology?
This is an impossible problem. Yeah, I'm going to say something a little heretical here. I think it's essential that technologists ask and try to answer these questions with as much rigor as they can. I'm now myself building technology and starting a firm, so I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth on this. The research is really clear. Even I think the recent evidence from all of these deployments of large language models are very clear. Like, you can throw millions of dollars, top of the line expertise, giant teams at this sort of predicting and managing unintended side effects question. Second order effects is what we call them in social science. And there's no way you're going to get the job done without hurling the technology out into the world in some way, and then some of those bad things happening. And if it's a ground-shaking technology, paradigm or era-defining technology, some of those effects are going to be nasty, like capital N. And I don't think there's a way around that. I think society as a collective, if you think of us as an organism, sort of us that seeks, improvement, it's right and proper that some parts of this is not to let technologies off the hook, but we can't expect any one group to manage all of those problems. It's just too complicated. Maybe in the future, some amalgam of human and artificial intelligence can handle that amount of complexity. But for now, I think the best we've got is engineers doing the best they can, and a critical function in society doing the best it can, and the funding part. It's the least worst system I can imagine. And we're all learning more about how to do our jobs better. I don't have an answer as to how to predict those second order effects. All I know to say is once you notice one, so Facebook, social media, teen and effects on young people. Once you notice an effect, then you're into this great luxury of building technology to help with the second order effect. That's what I'm doing with my firm, right? The problem that's in the core of this book is we don't jointly optimize productivity and human ability as we deploy intelligent technology. I'm building technology that will help enforce that joint optimization, right? So once you see it, it's a free commercial opportunity is the best way I know how to say it.
I've said on the show before, I think that every graduate of an accredited technical that gets a technical degree should be required to take at least one course in ethics. Unbelievably to me, we've gotten this far, and that isn't a requirement yet, but I believe it will be. Is there a way to accelerate the pace of innovation and celebrate what these technologies can do without harming humans? I mean, there's data, there's bias in the data, and there are lots of examples of making false positives and prevent. I mean, obviously, you've heard all the horror stories before, but is that inevitable or?
Yes. Yes.
You and I are techno optimists, and here
Yep.
we are struggling, to claim that it can be done without harming humans.
Oh, no, I never would have said that in a million years. There's no way you can build and invent anything new without causing waste, harm, failure in every case. And in the book, if you've been through it, like the invention of antisepsis, the elimination of infection from surgery has saved literally billions of lives and involved harming many humans in the beginning without their knowledge or consent. Required. The guy who invented that technique destroyed his notes and killed people. Up close. We don't talk about that. But so I'm not saying that's awesome. I think it's horrifying. And I'm not aware of a single story where that does not occur. So I think it's just a feature of society, and it's unfortunate, and it's not worth trying to eliminate. Making sure that we try to control it, constrain it, be aware of it, critique it, talk about it, hold people to account who are excessive in that way, never being satisfied. Those are requirements as well. It's like social justice. When are you going to have perfect social justice? We both probably grew up in the X-Files. Scully and Mulder had this episode where they could have whatever wish they wanted. He asked for peace on Earth, and guess what happened? No humans. Not going to happen.
I share your cynicism, but I also believe that conversations like this are part of the start of an answer. Just heightening awareness to what could go wrong and asking the question, and also holding the algorithms accountable and holding
Absolutely.
the authors of the algorithms accountable and holding the apps accountable for the decisions they make, and not, everybody can't claim, plausible deniability because,
Exactly.
it was the data, it was the app, it was this or that, the LLM. So I think that's a conversation we need to have more of.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting you label me as displaying cynicism. It feels like realism to me, but I think we create problems by trying to purify the conversation rather than recognize that we must strive for excellence and high ethics and, improving the world, not making it worse. And at the same time, recognizing that that is not what society ever does or ever will in a pure sense. And you just try to do better every day.
So Matt, I got to get you off the hot seat. We're about out of time. In fact, we're way over time. But you got to answer one last question for
Sure.
me. You know so much about the past of work. I'd like to know, when you and I are back here and it's 2034 and we're recording a version of this conversation, how's it different? Are we better off as a species? Has our relationship with machines changed? What's different in a decade?
Yeah, I am a scenario planner type thinker on these kinds of questions. So I have a sort of probabilistic map of what could or is likely to happen, not like what's gonna happen. A lot of this has to do with whether the bulk of the technical change in this epoch, in this era, is behind us or in front of us. And I personally am unclear on that, although I lean towards it's in front of us. So if it's behind us, then, 10 years from now, we're getting the hang of LLMs, AI-based automation in a variety of settings. And we all have our, agents running around doing stuff for us, interacting with each other and so on. You can imagine it right now. And in that setting and world, I want to see, and I think it's very possible, but also necessary, that we build an infrastructure that enhances human capability and complements that, so that the future of skill is something that looks like in the last chapter of my book. Man, you can learn more, better, and do better in this world and become more, fully yourself and flourish in your skills in ways that were not possible in human history before 2036, 2034. So I think that's feasible and necessary. If the bulk of the change is in front of us, then I honestly I don't think anybody's really sure. And I still think it's very possible that the future is going to be more radically wonderful than it has been in the past, and we have to try for that. I'm excited about that, but what is going to, we really, I just don't know.
Man, that's quite a cliffhanger. You're definitely going to have to come back, and we're gonna pick up where we left off, if that's okay.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of cognitive prostheses we'll bring to the conversation.
I like that description of him. Matt, thanks for hanging out. This has been great. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Seriously. And here's to 2034. Talk to you then.
You bet. Matt, where can the audience learn more about you and the book and the work that you're doing?
www.mattbeane.com, MATBEANE.com. That's a splash page for the book, but also straight to the Substack I've been talking about. If you want to hear my daily rantings on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, it'll take you all there too.
It's a fascinating read. Thanks for the research. And we're going to do this, and it's not going to be in 2034. It's going to be before then.
Cool. Deal.
Good stuff. Gosh, that's all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.